Hey Hopevale, what's happening? Paul Miller coming to you with a special edition of the Hopevale podcast. I'm sitting here with Brent Ferris, our student ministries pastor, and it's near the end of his time, as I'm sure you've heard, as student pastor at Hopevale. So we wanted to take a deeper dive into the journey, the conversation. We want to give everyone a chance to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit and hear what God's been up to in your life, Brent, and what he might have up his sleeve for the future. And so that's the purpose of this conversation today. So welcome. Thanks for taking some time to join me for this conversation. You know, I feel like we should start back at the beginning and not assume that just because your last name is Ferris that everybody knows your story at Hopevale. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, your family's connection to Hopevale, how long for you, and all that kind of stuff.
So my brother and I, we used to go to a church in the area, and there was some transition actually happening at the time. And so my brother was also like, he's older, he has a sweet truck and rims and the sound system, and he kept getting yelled at for loud music and things like that at the church. And so we just said, you know what, like, let's go explore. So my brother and I actually came here the first time, and I could actually tell you right where we sat we were in the vault.
So you came on a Sunday morning.
Came on a Sunday morning,
okay,
and which is now the student room. Back then was just the auditorium,
right?
And we sat there, and I remember Dan was up, and we're listening, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is good. And
Are you in like high school at the time? Or?
Yeah, I'm 16. He's 18. And so we said, we came home, and our parents were like, what'd you think? How'd it go? And we're like, yeah, we're going to move. We're going to move over there. And then it was probably 6 months, maybe a year later that, Amber trickled in a couple times with us. And then my parents eventually came with us, which just goes to show, like, the power of student ministries,
That's right,
the
man.
students are it, but they pull the family towards something. But it was just a time for us to kind of own our portion of the faith. Like Lance and I, we had not made a decision where we go to church back in that day. I mean, we went with our parents, and now that we were older and we were starting to figure some things out, and Lance was getting a little bit more heat from some people, it was like, dude, we don't have to deal with that. Let's move to this next piece. And
so you're a Christian at the time. You were raised in a Christian home and all the things, right?
Yep. And so we've been here now. I'm 35 in April, so it'd be, like 19 years almost. And I think we came in the fall, so we call it a safe 18 years.
Yeah. So you go through your high school years here at Hopevale. Your family ends up all at Hopevale.
Yep.
And then you go away to school at CMU, I think?
CMU, that's right. Fire Up Chips forever, which I've realized anybody who went there can't say CMU without saying Fire Up Chips, which makes me happy,
I've never heard that before. That's good.
It's like a whole thing. So so we go to CMU, which is about 45 minutes away, so it's not really that bad. And I was heavily involved in a ministry on campus that ran on Thursday nights. So my Sundays were still kind of wide open. Okay. And they did a Sunday morning thing, but it was like, I had this home church, and my mom wanted to see me every now and then. And so I would come back for Sundays, particularly Sunday mornings when I wasn't running around doing crazy fun stuff or whatever. Yeah. And then they got to a spot eventually through my years in college where I was really wrestling with ministry. And
at some point you started wondering if I'm supposed to do student ministry kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And the transition was like from camp ministry, because I was really involved in camps. Like, do I want to do camp stuff? And it was too bubbly for me, it was too much a bubble. You're in your own thing. And I did that for a couple summers, and then stepped in when Mike Garner was here, stepped into an internship under Mike. And it was actually Dan Davis who led me through that. And I said, I don't have a degree, or, I'm not going to Bible school. He goes, just get your degree and get to work.
Yeah.
Because you'll find out if you like it or not real fast. And I loved it.
So you're doing student ministry fresh out of college, or finishing up college.
Finishing up
college with Garner, and Dan's the senior pastor.
Yep.
And then a couple of twists and turns I know in your journey since then, right?
Yes.
Like leave, come back, and everything else. Walk everybody through that, because I don't think everyone knows that story.
Yeah, so Mike is like, you need to go to seminary. And I'm like, what's a seminary? So I go to seminary for a year, and it was crazy fun. I was in Denver for that. And I think I found, well, a couple of great stories out of there. One, I got a paperback, said you are not an academic. That was my grade. And I said, is that like an A? Because there's an A in there. Like, does that count? Or how does that work? And, I'm just a relational dude. I write that way. I can't write a paper super static, like I have to be flural, and it's just part of who I am. And then I had a really great professor tell me that that seminary probably shouldn't be for me. And that was a really cool story. We talked about that once upon a time and on a podcast, but just the reality of like, hey, there are things that you do naturally that we can't really teach some of these guys at seminary. And then he handed me a Bible, handed me a theology book, and said, you can learn this. Yeah. And to get to work. And so I was like, okay. So I went for another semester, and then I stepped out, and which was a huge money saver. I mean, your ministry ministry isn't like paying millions of dollars, guys. Like, it's not paying that much money, So, tip your pastors, I guess. Like on the way out, hey, that was a good sermon. But so that was a really cool moment in my life. It was a really like identifying moment for me of if I feel like I have a little bit of I think I have a little bit of arrogance in me that if I had a degree, I would try to take credit for what God has done.
Sure.
And I don't know another option because I don't have the full degree. I have half of one, so like to be in that spot where like everywhere we've gone, God has just done unbelievable stuff.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about the whole seminary thing, right?
We talked a lot.
There's some parallels in our stories. I had an amazing high school experience, and my youth pastor at the church I grew up in changed my life, discipled me, and I knew that if I could turn around and do that for one other person, that would be worth it for me. So I'm like, okay, I guess the next thing is go to seminary. But it was really hard to be in seminary when you're also on the front lines of doing the ministry, because it's like I can go to class and I can write papers, or I can go hang out with this person who needs to know about Jesus. Yeah. Right.
And this is like 30,000 feet. This is ground level. Yeah. And you're attracted to one of those. Yeah.
Well, okay. So what was it for you that, climb back into your head back in those days? What was it at kind of internally that was leading you to, I want to do student ministries? Like I said, for myself, it was the guy who discipled me through high school changed my life. And I'm like, I just need to do that for one other person. That's what it was for me. What would it be for you?
Yeah. We were here and it had, they had Mike, Ken, Kirk, and Dan all on a panel, and they were just Q&A.
Ken McGilvery, Kirk Lochner.
Yes.
Mike Garner.
Yeah, listen to that lineup. That's like an old Red Wings lineup right there. That's like Konstantinov. Right? Yeah. And so they were doing this thing, and they talked about the hedgehog, the hedgehog with the circles, Yeah. And someone was like, how do you know when you're called to ministry? And they go, here's the hedgehog. And they drew it up on the whiteboard at the time. It was like a chalkboard probably back then, or some archaic stone or whatever. And they drew that up, and they said, this is the spot where, you can get the most. And I was like, that's interesting, because I'm good with people, good with kids at the time. I mean, I was 20, 21. So I'm like, I'm good with kids, and I'm very passionate. Like in that moment, in that season of my life, I was ripping up the Bible, like just reading it and soaking it. And I mean, I must have read the Gospels 8 times in a year. I mean, I was just so in love with the Bible. Like I was just so in love with it, which was, you grew up in church. That's actually the first time I did that in my life. I got a little older. And then I'm sitting there, and, Andy Stanley was hitting this is right when podcasts were just starting to come out, and Andy Stanley's sermons were really big for me in that season. And Francis Chan and these guys were changing my worldview in a way I never experienced before in my life. And then there's this hedgehog thing, and I'm like, maybe, and so then there was like, well, can you make money at it is one of the circles, and because you got to eat. And I was like, whoa, like ministry's a thing. And I feel a lot. I tell people this. I feel like I kind of volunteered for ministry. This happened, and then I was at the college ministry, and I was looking around, and like, this is not going to be a stab at men, But I'm looking around and I'm like, where have all the dudes gone?
Yeah.
Where are the leaders that are men? I see like 75 women leading, which women, you're amazing. We love you, but where are the guys?
Yeah.
And I said, like, here I am, God, like, put me in. If you want me to do it, put me in. And
so that was in college, like towards the end of your college years.
And that's when I call Mike and Dan, and I get in the internship, and I just start rolling.
And what did Garner have you doing as a youth intern here?
Yeah. So we would teach series. You had to take a series, and one of it was to measure, do you have a teaching gift?
Yeah.
And which was good.
Yeah.
One is always a hard way to figure it out. 2, 3, 4, and you're like, okay, yeah, this guy either has it or don't,
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really cool. So I taught this series, and like first day, he was like, you got it. And so he was pushing me really hard toward teaching, and he was throwing books at me and all these things. And actually, Adam Harbaugh came up with this thing from Communicating for a Change, this like little cheat sheet.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I have that running around. Like I still use that. So
wow.
I got to give Adam some credit on that a little bit. Adam,
That's
thanks,
cool.
bro. Thanks for doing the hard work on that. So I had this thing where, the me, we, God, you, we, all these things. And so he just was pushing me toward that. And then there was the other piece of you're a small group leader as well.
Okay.
Which is where most of the people at Hopevale know me through is the small group leader part.
Okay.
And that was a lot of fun. I mean, I was one of those small group leaders that probably shouldn't have been to a degree, because I would break rules and we would have fun and in all the right ways,
Okay, so I had I'm going to out Kevin Peschke a little bit.
You should.
Like I had coffee with him the other day, and he was telling me about his first tour as a small group leader in the high school ministry, and he had this faraway look in his eye that was kind of like, I'm not sure I should tell Paul all the stories
yeah.
all the stories of things that happened back in the day. So I get that. I mean, that was my journey as well. So
wait, I got one more piece of that.
Okay.
So last night, one of the elders came to my last night.
Okay.
And I won't tell you who the elder is. It's a former elder, which is a big list, which is good. And they said, my first experience with you ever, you were in this room and you threw a chair. And I'm like, I Bobby Knighted a chair, and they were like, yeah, and I don't remember the context, but I'm like, yeah, it was probably worship, and I threw a chair to get it out of the way to move from worship. And I was like, oh no. So that's a thing. That's the kind of legacy you got running around. It's
yes.
Hey Brett, you're a great preacher, but one time you threw a chair, and
and then somewhere along the way, you get to the point where you got to yell at dudes for doing the things that you did when you were 20, right?
That's the worst.
That's the transition. Okay, so that all predates my time at Hopevale, right? And so
even Sam's time. That's all before Sam got here.
Okay, so then somewhere along the way, Mike Garner moves to Texas.
Yep.
And he says, Brent, come with me.
Sam came in, and I had gone to Denver for seminary.
Yeah.
That's that season. And then while I was in Denver, we came back. We worked in middle school for a season, for 1 year, and then Dana and I were married and went back to Denver together.
Okay.
And then Mike goes to Texas.
Okay.
Yep. So that's kind of how that time. It's a little bit back and forth, but.
And then what did you do at the church in Texas?
Yeah. So Mike was like, hey, I need a student guy.
Yeah.
But really what it ended up being was it was a full rebuild. So when we got there were like 70 people and a budget of $110,000. I was making $20,000 a year part-time, surviving, and and Mike was like, I wish I could get you more and all this. And so Mike was like, if we do this right and we just put our feet to the ground and gospel forward, and it's going to be really cool to watch. And in the 4 years we were there, 3 years that we were there, we went from 70 to 580 people on an Easter Sunday. We had 2 services. We had full staff. We had a budget sitting at like $600,000 or $700,000. I mean, watching God do his thing. And all we were doing, was we were just going to football games. And it's a smaller town, Texas,
Hanging out with
so
students,
you're just doing stuff. Yeah, you're going to, you're just being there. I mean, I remember Dana and I got sponsored by the church to get a hotel room in Dallas for the cheer competition, because our school was in it. And now that same school has won the national championship like 6 times in a row.
Yeah.
And we were back in the day, it was just their first competition. So it's just fun stuff like that where
that's awesome.
It's like you're just going, I guess we're going to Dallas this weekend,
That's awesome. Yeah, man. Yeah, sorry, you just sent me down a road of
Yeah.
youth sports in Texas, and
yeah, and you're just doing,
there.
you're just doing stuff because it's like, yeah, we're, like, I remember, okay, so I remember one retreat, we had this like building, it was like this really cool, I want to give you every detail, but I won't. And they had this like building with a bunch of like wooden pillars all around it. And one year, I always did a hammock. It's Texas in February. It's like 80 degrees and perfect. And I would hammock at night. And so this one year, all the girls in our student ministry were like, well, can we? And I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
So everybody's got their own hammock, like we're not going to do 4 to a hammock or anything like that. So we had 3 hammocks high on 7 pillars, like 21 kids hammocking outdoors in Texas for a retreat. And they had literally just got Tempur-Pedic bed mattresses. And they wanted to hammock. And so I'm like, you probably...
It's awesome.
You probably can't do this, though, at most places in the country because you can't trust the kids.
You're not doing that in Michigan.
You're not doing that in Michigan at all. But, like, you just, like there's this town, like they all grew up together. They all knew each other. We trusted that they wouldn't do stupid stuff. Nobody's sneaking out, and it was just fun.
That's awesome.
That's technically breaking a rule in the student ministry world. Like some student pastor just cringed in their life, but
oh yeah, okay. And so that's, in some ways, it sounds like that might be like the golden era of student ministry for you. And then you leave there and you end up at 242 down in Ann Arbor. Talk to us about what that ministry was like, just to give everybody a little taste of that environment for you.
Yeah, Texas was the most hands-on in it. In the trenches, and then you moved to like a 242. You got multi-site. We had 7 campuses at the time. You've got student pastors who are better than me. They're unbelievable guys. I love them to this day. We text all the time, and they're just good friends of mine. And it's just a different beast. You change. You have to shift the way you lead because you become more of a on the ground to more of a hey, here's the master vision of where we go, and your leaders become the people on the ground.
Yeah.
So you spend less of your time with students and more of your time with your leaders, caring for your leaders and pastoring your leaders, and because they're doing the hard stuff.
Well, and that's the transition. I remember when in my journey as a student guide, realizing that student ministry is really ministry to adults that minister to teenagers.
Yeah, unless you're in like a really small context, which I haven't been since Texas. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and 242 is great. It was tons of fun.
And then that's when, like, I came to Hopevale, and we were looking for a student guy, and Sam Burke was the next gen lead pastor at the time. And I remember meeting you at some volunteer event and I remember asking Dan, who is that guy? And he's like, oh, he's got like tons of history at Hopevale. And then you came here to be the student pastor, and 4 years?
Yeah.
4 years. And then about 2 years ago, we had a conversation that started with you saying, hey, how do you know when it's time to be done with student ministry or to transition into, it's not like adult ministry, and it's not grow up out of student ministry. Right. It's just how do you make that transition? And we had an awesome conversation about that. Tell us what was going on in your head at that point.
Yeah, so there's 2 pieces. Like when Sam called me up for the job, he said, how much longer do you really have?
Yeah.
And I thought, at the time, 4 to 10 years, I don't know.
Right.
Something like that. And then I got here, and one of our first meetings in your office was, what are you going to do when I replace myself? Do you remember that one? And we were like, yeah, okay. You're like, okay. And then, some of that happened a little faster. It happened right before Lennon passed in our lives. That summer, it was kind of like I was just like gone a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my own kids, and I'm like, man, I just spent all of this time with other people's kids, which isn't bad. That's the sacrifice you make when you're in the game of student ministries. But I was looking at my sons, thinking to myself, man, I gotta be a dad for a while. And then I came to you and said, okay, how do you know? And that started the conversation of, well, you start getting a little less excited to show up on a Sunday night. And
right. Well, yeah. Like I remember talking at that time about, my own journey, starting as a student guy and growing up into adult ministries or whatever. And I remember at the time I was at Willow Creek in Chicago, and I was at Buffalo Grove High School at a football game on a Friday night. And I was like, I really kind of want to be home tucking my kids into bed. Mm-hmm. But here I am at the game.
And it's nothing against the kids playing the game.
No,
Who doesn't love a football game, right?
It's just your stage of life, your season of life changes, and your calling starts to shift, and you start to realize that, like, there are the guys who are youth pastors till they're 60 years old. I'm like, bless them. It's just not me, right?
Yep.
And not you, obviously. And I remember for myself starting to feel that transition, and so I would then go to the football games and bring Jared, my oldest, with me. He's 2 years old. So then I'm sitting at the football game with my toddler on my lap, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't really work, and all that kind of stuff. And so you go through that kind of transition, but it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't always come with clarity of what the next thing is. Like I remember talking to you, and you were like, not only am I restless with when am I done as a student pastor, but there was also this, I want to lead my own church.
Yep.
All the way 2 years ago,
you
were talking about that, and maybe didn't necessarily have everything worked out in your head, but it was just this sense of calling to that. Yeah. Tell us about that. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a creative dude, and I like to innovate, and I like to change things, and it's just kind of a part of who I am. It doesn't scare me at all. Like, I enjoy it. You know, the pandemic hit, and everybody was really nervous. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be fun. We're gonna have a lot of fun with this. And going through that season of, our conversations of, I know that there is a level of, to a degree, the only way to really change something is to lead it. And if you have a leader who is willing to change those things, then they can change fast. You know what I'm saying? And there's a piece. I'm trying to be really careful because I'm not trying to dog anything or anybody. I'm just being honest. So when we started those conversations, there were some things that I just really see the church, the global church, is going to be shifting in the next 20 years. I mean, I think that's going to be real. And I think a lot of people are going to be trying to figure out, we have this model of bigger, better, faster, crazier, funner, more crazy. And I think there's going to be this real big push toward intimate. And so I got really excited about that, and I thought, man, how do you capture what we're doing in students and the adults, because there is a difference. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that, right? Like Andy Stanley talks about how there are people who will be involved in a ministry or whatever, and they'll look around and they'll go, if I was in charge, things would be different. Yeah.
And they'd be better. And he talks about, don't be afraid of that guy. That just means he's a leader. And so you got to figure out how to empower that guy to do that. So when you talk about, hey, you don't want to throw shade at what's going on at Hopevale, it's not that. It's simply a leadership thing inside of you going, hey, man, if I were leading this thing, it'd be different and it'd be better.
Yeah. And I just have a very clear idea of what I think that should be and what I think it could be. And that's where I get really excited about what could be.
Yeah.
And then you get moved from what could be to what should be. So, I was really wrestling with that. And then we started conversations, and then Lennon died. And that was that was pinnacle in our story. I mean, it happened. I mean, we started talking in August, and then she passed in November.
Yep.
And then I had that sermon 3 weeks later. So we had retreat, I had my cousin's wedding, and then we had the sermon. And it was, so we told the story, and I didn't want to at all. I mean, I was fighting before I went on stage, like, God, I don't want to. And I heard this I felt this really clear voice say, are you coming or not? And I was like, anywhere you go, I'm going. And then we went out, and I ended up, it's not even in my notes. I ended up telling the whole church our story, and it wasn't even in my notes. And, and then the response from that. So when you're the youth guy and you're doing a sermon, there's a very real, no, he's the youth guy.
Yeah.
That you said that day, my father said that day, and a bunch of people I respect, and you guys said, hey, today you weren't the youth guy.
Yeah.
And that was oh man, And then that was like the first domino of,
Yeah.
whoa, God is doing something, and
Yeah.
he's moving us. And then we went through in the whole journey of February where we went away to not be in an empty home when on the birthday of Lennon. We had decided we were going to come back, and then we get a phone call from Dan, and it all fell apart. It's like, oh no, what is going on?
Yeah, so let's not blow past that for everybody, right? So you and Dana took some time
Yes,
on the other side of Lennon's death, and you were out of town when Dan started telling people. And I remember talking to Dan and him being like, yeah, I need to call Brent because I think you were in Florida.
Yeah, we were on our way. We were in Myrtle Beach, actually.
Okay. Yeah. And so Dan calls you to tell you that he's entering into a succession process. He's winding down his time at Hopevale. And I remember you just feeling like, you verbalizing to me that you're just like, the timeline is getting accelerated.
Yeah.
And not necessarily knowing what the end game is, just knowing that I think your exact phrase was, I don't have any more time to waste, I think is what you had to say at that point in time, which I love that. I think that's of God, right? So what's going on at that point in your head? Like you get that phone call.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that phone call and I'm like, what is going on? Cause he texted me and said, hey, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh no, like what did I do? There's no way that Dan is calling me to yell at me for something right now. Like that's just not who he is. And then he drops it. I cried. I mean, I've known Dan since I was 16. I mean, he was the first experience I had at Hopevale. So sitting there, I just bawled I bawled in like 80-degree weather looking at the ocean. So it wasn't that bad. Like, don't feel too bad for me.
Yeah.
And then Dana and I were like, we had literally just decided we were going to be done in December of the next year, which would have been this last December. We were going to go through another retreat. We were going to hopefully open it up in the fall, and that's a good time to get a good student pastor in and do a handoff thing, and it would have been really smooth. His news obviously was going to impact that timeline.
So you guys were going to be done and go plant a church.
We were going to be done, and we were going to start really investigating what that looked like.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're still exploring that as an option.
Right.
So like just the reality of that timeline, and we're like, okay, well then how long can we really go? And that's when you and I started really talking. Like, okay, dude, here's where we're at, here's what's going on, here's where we know we're going to be. And then we brought Sam into the conversation, said heads up. And then the opportunity opened, and we said, okay, God, like really felt like it was obedient to apply.
For sure.
And go through the process and let the process. And we were really affirmed through the process, which was really cool. Like Vanderbloemen was super affirming, like it's time. You know, like if we'd have gone through and Vanderbloemen was like, nah, you're not good, you're not ready for this, I'd be like, oh, I might need to rethink my life a little bit. But they were like, no, this is your next step. And then the question was where and what context, you know, and that's stuff we don't have control over, you know.
Right. And so the process plays out, and Hopevale hires Josh Pardee as senior pastor. You still have this calling to and love for the Great Lakes Bay region, which was a theme all the way through the conversation with us, is that you feel called to this region, to this area. So we're sitting here today, like a week out from your last day on staff, and what's in your head? Like what's coming, what's next, and where are you? What are you thinking about these days? I just would love for everybody to get to climb in your head a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that Dana and I are going to take a season. We're not sure how long. I mean, you can call it a sabbatical. I mean, we're going to take a season to heal up. You accrue wounds through ministry, and I've been in it full time for 10 years, 15 years of just ministry stuff. And you just accrue these things, and it's not like it's somebody intentionally is trying to hurt you, but you're at the pinnacle of where the Holy Spirit is working and human flesh is engaged. I mean, it's a battle, and you can't go through battle without accruing wounds. And so we're just going to take a minute. And I tell people, it's like, you're going to feel like we disappeared, because we are going to kind of disappear for a second.
Sure.
And just soak up some family time. I mean, I haven't not worked on a Sunday ever. So we're going to take a Sunday off. It's going to be crazy. And we're really heavily investigating. We're really praying through, God, like, what can you do in and through us in a season of our next, and really do believe that a church of some sort or some sort of ministry, I get really excited. We have obviously had a lot of theological debates. I get really excited about those, particularly with people who don't know Jesus. And that's like my heartbeat goes, and it's like, there's beautiful things about discipleship programs and classes and stuff, and those are good. But my best is, you have no idea who this guy is.
Okay.
Let me tell you more.
All right. So I'm going to protect you from yourself just a little bit.
Thank you.
Here. You just talked about you're going to take a season, and then like the next sentence, you're talking about the things that are coming. My prayer is that you get a season that truly is like a sabbatical, even if that's just like 2-3 months, whatever it is, just a season where you can unplug from ministry, where you can take the title pastor and set it off to the side and reestablish yourself as a child of his and all those things. Because on the backside of doing that, you'll be so much more ready, and you'll have so much more ability to seek clarity on what it is that he's doing for you, or has for you next. So I'm just going to encourage you to actually lean in to whatever that season is.
It's like wide open.
Not just go. Right?
It's hard for me, man. It's hard. And, I know that no matter what, I'll be preaching the gospel. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's going to be on a stage.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool. And
well, Jesus will still use you. He's still got things wants to do through you, but to have a season where he's going to do more in you than he's going to do through you is okay.
Yeah, that's what we're going for right now.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So then there are Hopevale people listening to this conversation who are like, well, I just want to support you and love you and appreciate you as you step into that season. How does that work, or what does that look like? I mean, I'm making fun of Adam yesterday in church, where I was like telling everybody give Adam a hug because he's a big hugger, right? And everything else. Like, what is it for you? What's the best way that the church can express their appreciation and their thanks to you? There's been a parent survey that we just sent out with all the transition going on. We surveyed all the parents and said, tell us what you want us to know and what you wish we would do. And I'm just getting inundated with parents talking about how much the environments that we provide right now for their kids, their students, are changing their lives. And so there's a huge level of appreciation, and I think a little bit of apprehension that something's going to change or whatever, and so it's our job to reassure parents of that. But if a parent is sitting there going, I want to tell Brent thank you, other than they've probably come up to you already on a Sunday after church and just chatted with you, but what else is there? I mean, are you going to be around? Are you going to be, maybe not on a Sunday morning, but
soaking up some encouragement. If you want to encourage me, that'd be cool. That's a beautiful thing. I'm a big words of affirmation guy, and it's affirming when you don't get to see that stuff when you're in it. You don't get to see the impacts. Like, I won't see these surveys, and that's okay.
Well, maybe you could. Maybe we just pull out
the affirmations, of, hey, like, this is where it happened. And I don't know, man, it's so hard, like, God is doing some really cool stuff in our lives, and pray for us, pray hard. Don't give me those weak ones. Do the good ones. Give me your best ones.
Yeah.
Because we're in a season of, like you said, we're in a season of waiting, and I will wait on the Lord as long as it takes.
Sure.
We won't go into our next because other people want us to. We will go when God says go.
Yeah.
And until then, I got a job, just working in the corporate world, doing my thing, just chilling, so it's kind of, I don't know, if you see us, don't be shy. Come say hello, come give us a hug, and we're not dying. I keep telling that to the kids, like, we're not dying, and there's a few of them that will continue to reach out, and a few of them that won't, and that's okay. Like, it's not bad. It's okay.
Yeah.
And we're praying for this next for the next. I mean, we poured a lot of time and energy into building something great, and we hope that the next person is able and ready and good to go. Yeah, which they will be, because y'all will you guys will do due diligence. But
yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to look right at the camera, right? Brent just told us that words of affirmation are a thing for him. So if you want to tell Brent thank you, or if you want to express appreciation to he and Dana for how God's used them, just send me an email here at the church, and we'll get those to you. I mean, we'll forward all those on, make sure that Brent gets those. So that's one thing that we can all do, and we can all be praying for clarity and for the ability to rest, and for patience in the process. You and I are both Enneagram 8s, and we've joked a lot over the years about how if God would just figure out that my timeline is better than his, you know?
Yeah.
So we can pray for you to that end and all of that. And I do want to give you, at the end of this conversation, I want to give you a chance to share like your parting shot with Hopevale. This has been your church home for forever.
Yeah.
On and off in different roles in different ways. And I know you have a deep love for this church and the people of this church. So if you, here's your last chance on microphone to look at that camera and tell the people of Hopevale what you want them to hear from you. What would it be?
Yeah. I mean, don't be hearers of the word. Do what it says. I mean, come on. If Jesus is coming back, let's get to work. What do we got a lot of people. We keep saying this number all over the place at 300,000.
Yeah.
Let's cut it in half. Let's be conservative. 150,000 people need Jesus. What are we waiting on?
Yeah.
Those are your coworkers. Those are your family members. Those are your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, neighbors. I mean, we got work to do. And I think there's a thought process when a leader steps into a next opportunity that there's like this big divide. In my opinion, we just became a two-headed monster, you know, and like we're on team with other people in the area. We are out here trying to bring the gospel to the Great Lakes Bay region.
Yeah. So
cheer me on. I'm cheering you on. And let's get to work, though. We can't be doing the same stuff we've been doing, man. Showing up on a Sunday and acting like we're good. If Jesus has come back, people need him bad. People need Jesus bad. And
well, and there's this ironic timing, right? Like what got us here won't get us there.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
And we're still coming out. The church, Big C, is coming out of the reset from COVID. So it's a fascinating time for you. It's a fascinating season for you to be entering into kind of a discovery process on church planting or being a senior pastor or whatever. You know, whatever it is that God has for you, because the rules are changing.
The rules are changing. Which gets me excited. It's freaking other people out right now. They're like, what? It's like, I'm pumped about that.
Yeah. I mean, the role of Sunday morning is changing.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you know, I don't want to go all the way into the Wayback Machine, but when you were talking about your era working with Garner down in Texas, and you were talking about relational forward ministry that was built primarily on relationships, it feels like we're heading back to that.
Yeah.
Right. In so many ways. And so it's going to be super exciting to see what God does in you guys, to see what he does through you guys, to figure out what partnership looks like, and standing shoulder to shoulder to take this region, you know, a movement of hope throughout the Great Lakes Bay region.
Yeah.
There's plenty of work to do. There's plenty of people that are missing God's grace and need to be introduced to Jesus and all of that. So I'm excited for you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for having this conversation with us, and let's see what God does. And thank you guys for joining in with us today. I feel like, man, we could have talked for forever.
Yeah, we always do, though. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I'd say this, man, we're not done.
Yeah.
You know, we're not done. It's just a season. And and it's on God's timing. I could have the clearest vision in the world right now of what God wants me to do, and until he says go, we're not going to go. So I just want to keep reiterating, like, that feels like a big piece that people need to know is we're not done. It's not over, and it's going to be really fun to create something, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, and I'll tell you this, I'll end with this. I've told you this, I know others on the elder board have told you this, that we believe that the kingdom needs a healthy, whole, engaged, passionate Brent Ferris leading the charge somewhere, somehow, in some way, with something. And so we champion you in that. We pray for you. We support you. We affirm you in that. So,
I appreciate that a ton.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us come along for the journey. And everybody that's joined in on this conversation, thank you for listening. And I don't know when we'll be back for the next episode of the Hopevale podcast, but this has been really fun.
Yeah. In God's timing, we'll do this again. I'll tell you everything that we're doing.
That's right. That's what we need to do. Commit to me that you'll come back on this podcast when you have another layer of clarity and you'll tell the whole church what it is that God's up to. Yeah.
We're going to go a little over. It's going to be fine. What are they going to do? Fire me? I know. I was too soon.
Yeah.
One of the things that the elder board and us, we've had great, this is what's so different about church world versus corporate world is a lot of lead time, a lot of prayer, a lot of conversation. It's not like this happened and then now it's over. It's like we've been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah.
And the elder board's been praying with me for a long time. It's not just, they just didn't start because of, the process or what, like they've been praying for a long time. And, we're committed to being a teammate. We're committed to being on the same team, and we're committed to the podcast. That sounds great to me. When it's time, we'll come back. We'll tell everybody what's going to happen. I would imagine it's going to be pretty fun to see. And, and I hope it is, but again, that clarity of time. And so I'll commit to a podcast. That'd be fun. Coming in and say all the cool things God did. I want to have a season of that sabbatical, and when we're healed and fully healthy, I hope you see a different me across the table when we get there, and that would be really cool. And I hope that's true.
Yeah. Well, I've always seen Jesus in and through what you do.
Appreciate that.
So we're just going to see more of him.
I hope so.
Which is a good
Less
thing.
of me, man.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this conversation today, and we'll see you next time when we take a deeper dive. Or just do Hopevale podcast, whatever
they're going to call it.
All right.
Sky's the limit.
That's right. Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale Church.